going to Pittsburgh? There's 5 or 6 churches in our group that's going to go to Pittsburgh. Well, I'm having a golf tournament. 4 of his friends are having a golf tournament. I've come and played in every one of y'all. And don't say, well, he'll get all of them. First come, first serve. You jump in there. Be a part of this. I'm telling you. You get blessed for doing it because it's a great bunch of kids out there working hard to do ministry.
All right. All right. So I don't know how many of you have ever had the opportunity to address a group of people, right? There's 2 times where it's really, really difficult, okay? One is when clearly the people in the room aren't all that interested, okay? That's always challenging. The second is right after lunch, all right? And so there's a lot of challenges with that, but the next hour or so is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to do a little bit more presentation, which gives you a little bit more opportunity to fall asleep. So, all right, I'm asking, try to lock in with me, and we'll navigate through some information over the next little bit. I just want to say a couple things, thinking back about the first couple hours that we've had together. First of all, I want to go ahead and just say thank you, okay? Your engagement and your participation already, the first half of this workshop has been tremendous. The other side of that is I'm really encouraged. I'm really, really encouraged. And I think the point was made earlier that the people in this room clearly have a high level of commitment, right, to your meetings and to reaching the next generation. That's why you're here. I don't think anybody's here by obligation. The people that are in this room want to be in this room. And I'm thankful for that. But I'm encouraged by the things that I'm hearing from you. I'm encouraged by the things that you're passionate about. I'm telling you, I'll go back to this again. The things, your heart is for the things that everybody needs. And not just things that everybody needs, but the things that matter most to everybody in the world. And I just want to affirm you in that that's a fantastic place to be, right? And your desire to connect with the next generation, to share your passion for these things with them, I think is great as well. And so the first question I want to ask us as we jump into our afternoon together, and we begin to start our second section here. This is going to be part 2 in your notes. Is I want to ask a question for the whole room, all of us here, okay? Who's missing? When we think about the people that are in your meetings, the demographics of the people that are in your meetings, who's missing? What's that? Youth? Young families. Gen X. Okay. What else? Anybody else? Any other demographics, categories of demographics that you would use to say these folks are missing? What's that? Young couples? Absolutely. Right. Singles. Right? Singles. One of the most untapped groups in most churches. Right? Is singles. Young singles. Absolutely. And the reality is that you're experiencing something that is not uncommon to churches all over America. You're experiencing something that is highly common. Now here's the reality though, is when you're experiencing something personally, just because it's true nationally, doesn't make you feel any better. Right? It's pretty easy pill to swallow when you hear something that's true that you're not experiencing personally that's a national statistic, right? If it was true that you've heard, right? People haven't come back to church since COVID. Okay? If that wasn't true in your particular environment, in your meeting, right, it might be easy to go, well, yeah, I hate to hear that. I don't really like to hear that. That's discouraging. But it's going to be okay. You can be a little more optimistic. But when it affects you personally, right? You take it a little bit more seriously. When you take something personally, right, you feel it more deeply, right? You feel it more deeply. If someone was to say something derogatory about a person that you're disconnected from, sometimes that's, okay, we can let that slide. But when someone says something maybe that's hurtful towards somebody that you love, you're in a personal relationship with, right, it affects you more deeply. And I think when we ask the question, okay, who's missing in your meetings? There's a pretty general agreement that the younger generations seem to be missing. Right? That's why we're here today, right? That's kind of the driving question behind why we're here today. But when you hear that you're not alone, that this is true nationally, chances are, though it could give you a sense of, okay, at least we're not alone, it still doesn't make you feel any less desirous of having those folks in your meeting. Right? And so the second question that I want us to try to spend some time answering together for part 2 is this. Who are they? Right? We spent the first couple hours this morning talking about who are we? Right? And we've got a wall full of answers to that question up here that illustrate those things that are unique about you organizationally as friends, as Quakers, those things that you think those outside of you need, and then, as I said, your heart, that which is at the center of who you are, that you deeply long to share with others. Right? Now, we turn the attention from looking at ourselves to trying to understand the landscape of what's around us. Okay? And so for the next little bit, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to spend some time talking about who is the next generation. And so what I want to do is actually, for the next few minutes, I want to talk through a pretty large chunk of information regarding generational differences. Okay? Here's what I would encourage you to do. I'm going to put a chart on the screen. Okay? It's a lot of words, and they're not that big. I get it. Okay? I would encourage you to take a picture. All right? Take a picture of it. Take out your phone, zoom in, take a picture, and hopefully that way it gives you something you can hold on to. Just so you're aware over the next little bit, I'm going to get out of the way because I do not want to be in your pictures. I might mess up your picture. I've been known to ruin a camera. So this is what it feels like to be in preschool, like a preschool program, and all the parents and grandparents are in the room trying to take a picture. I've never been on the other side of it. Everybody got it? All right. It's these right here I don't want to get in the way of. So, all right. So for information, so you know that I'm not making these things up, okay? There's about 4 resources that I've drawn on for this particular information. One is the Department of Labor Statistics. If you're familiar with the Department of Labor, there's a Department of Labor Statistics that's attached to it. A lot of information regarding the workforce. Studies around the workforce in America have been some of the predominant researchers around generational differences, because most people, at the end of the day, no matter what vocation you're in, you're worried about the bottom line, right? You're worried about the bottom line, and when it comes to the bottom line, all that matters is making sure that you're in the black, right? You don't want to be in the red. You want to be in the black at the end of the year, whatever your fiscal year is. How do you do that? You make good decisions in your business. Part of that is making sure you hire the right people and put people in the right places. So the Department of Labor and Labor Statistics has driven a lot of generational insight. And so that's one of the places that I've drawn some information from. A couple other of research groups are Barna. If you're familiar with them, they do a lot of research specifically on the church. And so Barna is one of those. Pew Research is another that does a decent amount regarding church engagement as well. And then the final group that I'm drawing quite a bit of information from as well is, ironically, the Purdue University Global is what it's called, and it's basically Purdue University's research arm as well. And they've done a decent amount of work around this. So for the next few minutes, I want to talk through some of these generational differences. But as we do that, first category there is the years. Traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. My hunch is, based on the things that I've heard, is that the majority of you are talking about millennials and Gen Z, and there's a little bit of a bleed over into Gen X. But I want to just, again, this is not for any other reason, just to see the representation in the room. Would you raise your hand if you would be considered a traditionalist, if you don't mind identifying? Okay. What about baby boomers? Probably the majority of the room, it looks like. Gen X? Okay. And then, are there any millennials in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, awesome. All right, by these standards, I'm a millennial as well. Okay, so by these standards, different research groups use different numbers. I think the roundest ones are the easiest ones, and so that's what I always default to, is using these particular breakdowns. And so now you see a little bit about who's in the room, but I want to show you some of the trends of what happens when you move from the left side of this chart to the right. Right? Traditionalists, as you talk about characteristics that are unique to or descriptive of a traditionalist, they're dependable, straightforward, tactful, and loyal. Right? Those that came behind them, the baby boomers, optimistic, competitive, workaholics, very team-oriented. Then Gen X, right? They're flexible, informal, a bit skeptical, more independent. We move into the millennials, competitive, civic, meaning that they are conscious of the needs of people, of others. They want to see and notice and identify and do something about the needs of others. Open-minded, achievement-oriented. And then Gen Z, right? Which would be, I mean, you see the ages there, right? This would be those that have been born in the last 20 or so years. So they're the kids in our world today for the most part. Global, entrepreneurial, progressive, less focused. What do you see changing in the characteristics from the left side to the right side? Tell me your observations. What do you see changing over time? What's that? Yeah, moving from us or we, right, to me. Yeah, you definitely see a little bit more of an independence, right? You see that word there. There's some more independence that begins to show up, right? Competition, achieving is usually a personal desire, right? Entrepreneurial, I don't need you, I can do my own thing, right? You see a lot more of that for sure. What else? What else do you see changing? Right.
Accepting of everything.
That's right. Much more flexibility, much more accepting, right? It's good. Great observations. What else? What's that? Yeah, moving away from what has been traditional. What's interesting to me, and again, I'm not an expert in this field, okay? I don't spend all of my time studying these statistics. I want to be really, really clear about that. But what I do think is happening, and I think we'll see happen in the next 50 years, is actually our generations begin to get smaller and smaller in terms of how many years it takes between changes in generations. Because what you have is, if you look at 1925 and the previous 50 years, there's not a lot of differences in the generations. The pace of change from generation to generation was slower. Pace of change for everything was slower. And then what you find is that group of people that have similar characteristics is much broader. You could actually take the traditionalist and go from 1945 backwards almost to 1900 and find a whole lot more similarities. What I think is going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years is that generational years are actually going to get smaller. It's going to be fewer and fewer. We're going to have a generation that's 2040 to 2052, or 2055. Why? Because the pace of change is so much more rapid now than it once was. You have tradition that was appreciated, adopted, right, and normative to a group of people that see tradition as a bit more outdated, irrelevant, slow. There's a desire for faster pace and change, right? And so the observations we've already said, right? You've got more me focus, it seems, more independence. There's a lot more flexibility, right, as we move this way. There's a move away, it seems, from tradition. All right, anything else? Yeah. Absolutely. Great observation. Great observation. So the same Department of Labor Statistics said this was in 2013, so 10 years ago. They said that the average length of time an American stays in their job is 3.9 years. That was in 2013. At the same time, the average length of time a 20-something stayed in their job at that point was almost half of that. Now, we recognize that turnover at younger ages, more entry-level positions, is often going to be higher. We all see that. In your vocations, you've probably seen that, right? You work your way up in an organization, right? You used to get a Chevy, then you got a GMC, and then you got a Buick, and then you got a Cadillac, right? Now you get a Cadillac when you're 20. And so what's happening is the pace at which people move is so much faster, and so the length of time in which people commit to something is so much shorter. And so we're seeing commitment levels seem to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Right? I haven't looked at the most recent statistics on the length of time people stay in a job, but I know that it has begun to shrink even further from what I understand. So.
Is it just me, or is sports an absolute illustration of this?
Could be. Tell us how.
Transfer portals?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all about, well, I can play 1, 3, 5. You know, you don't categorize anybody into point guard to center. You know, you have a basketball player.
Yep.
You have a football player who plays the line. You don't have the specialization
Yep.
that we used to see.
Yeah.
And to me, it's that way in every sport.
Yeah.
And like in free agency, there's no commitment. Where am I playing this week?
Yep.
I mean, how many teams did Baker Mayfield play for last year? 3.
Yep.
So
Yeah. I don't think that that's a bad illustration at all. I think in many ways what we're seeing is these characteristics that are changing, right? Generation to generation, which shouldn't be a surprise to us. Again, though the length of time things stayed the same, may have been longer at one point. I mean, if we trace this back to 1776 in America, things were much different, right? Change is an unavoidable reality. It's an unavoidable reality, changes. But the pace of it is so quick now that in a single lifetime or less, you see so much more of it, right? You see exponentially more change in your lifetime. Your parents' generation saw change. You probably heard that from them. You probably butt heads with them at some point when you were growing up because of changes that you wanted to see happen in your life. You probably experienced that with your own kids and maybe even grandkids. So change is an unavoidable reality, but what we're seeing is the pace of change is becoming so much more quick, and I think sports is a great illustration. Right? You had people in professional sports that went to a place and they stayed there for their whole career. Now that's unheard of. It's unheard of. I mean, college sports in particular has changed drastically just in the last 5 years. Right? Not only now can they go wherever they want, but they can make millions in college. Millions. I had an athletic director, or a former athletic director in the ACC, who told me that his estimation is that if you are on a highly ranked Power 5 conference basketball team, even if you don't play, there's a good chance you're making $500,000 a year, if not more. The coach at Kentucky, John Calipari, just announced as a new recruiting strategy, I might add, that he just got an entire team deal with a sponsor for his team. And so whoever's on the team is going to get that money. The world has changed so drastically in every space that we're in, whether it be sports and vocation, whether it be family life and other things. Yes?
In music,
Absolutely.
I used to have to get a record deal with some company, and now they just go on YouTube, make their own video, and they can be an overnight sensation.
Think about those that made it big in 1940 in the music world. Name somebody. What's that? Glenn Miller. Okay. Had to earn it. Had to know the right people. Had to be in the right places. Had to actually have skill and ability. You laugh, but the reality is there's plenty that don't, right? Right? Had to go and get in front of people. Let's fast forward. Somebody name a top artist from the last 20 years. What's that? Bruno Mars. Fine example. Bruno Mars has made an unbelievable amount of money. The majority of the wealth that any artist over the last 20 years has developed, any wealth that they've accumulated, has come through means of digital influence and digital plays, which means this: Apple Music, Spotify, you go on and on and on. When I remember back to, what was it? You've got Napster that started this whole thing where online music became available for free. Then they got sued by a whole bunch of people because no music is ever free, right? But now I can pay $10 a month and get all the music I want. And I can play it as much as I want, whenever I want, and whatever it is. And I have access to more music than I would ever want in my lifetime. It's changed drastically, right? From 1925, even from 1990 to today, from 2000 to today. The pace of change continues to pick up. I'm going to jump down a couple rows into shaped by, right? Because I think this is important and it really influences much of the generations. But the traditionalists being shaped by the Great Depression, World War II, radio and movies. The other day, we were in the car, and one of my sons, who's 12 years old, we were listening. It was while we were in Florida visiting my parents this past week, actually. And my radio came on, right? My Bluetooth had disconnected or something from my phone, and so the radio came on. And it was funny because if you remember the days when you would press the accelerator and the music, like the static would get a little bit louder. You know what I'm talking about? Did that ever happen to you in your vehicle, in your car? Right? So we start going down the road and he said, "Dad, why does the music sound like," he couldn't come up with a word for it. He said like messy. And I said, well son, it's because it's over the radio. And he said, "What's that?" He's 12 years old. He has no concept of what the radio is. But yet it was a primary means of information sharing, right? For many during that era. Moving on, the baby boomers, shaped by Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and Watergate. I think about some of my friends in that demographic and how deeply they feel about politics. And I think about what shaped their generation. That makes sense. right? When you begin to see what's behind some of how people feel, it begins to not just make sense, but it also gives you a degree, where was it? Of compassion, right? Of compassion. It was up here somewhere. Right? But compassion toward others when you begin to see these things. Generation X, right? Among maybe some of the older side of the demographic that I believe that you're trying to connect with, shaped by the AIDS epidemic. They feel social justice. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the dot-com boom. It's hard for me, and I'm a 40-year-old, it's hard for me to imagine, though I lived without it, but it's hard for me to imagine life without the internet. Okay? As a 40-year-old. Which means those younger than me can't imagine it. It's all they've ever known, right? Which is why you see, as we move ahead, the millennials, Columbine, the internet, 9/11, right? Tragedy begins to affect them in a unique way. And in many ways, what's happened over the last 40 years is that tragedy has become normal. Normal, right? And we see it, it's marking them. Life after 9/11, when you get into Gen Z, what is life after 9/11? Security. Much more heightened security everywhere you go. I went to a high school basketball game in Winston-Salem this past year. My children attend a private Christian school, okay? And so, though I grew up in the public school world in Winston-Salem, I don't go to a ton of athletic events at public schools. But we went to one in December, and I realized, as I was walking up to the door and saw the metal detector that was there, that I had a knife in my pocket. It's just a knife that I carry to open things. I'm not there to get in a fight. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I just always have it in my pocket in case I need to open a package. Right? Cut a string off a shirt. Had no ill intention with it, but I wasn't getting in there with that in my pocket. Security, heightened security, it's a new norm. And so for Gen Z, they're shaped by life after 9/11, the Great Recession. Now, right, of 2008. You probably remember it well. Maybe you were like me, and you bought a house in 2007. That didn't go well for me. That impacted me, though, because I can tell you, the next time I had to purchase a house, I was much more cautious. I was much more conscientious because of my experience in those years. What else marks Generation Z? Access to technology from a young age. My youngest, 4 years old, about to be 5. Last night, she came up to my wife and said, "Hey, Mom, I know your phone number." And I'm like, "Oh, this is great." My 4-year-old, when she gets to kindergarten, she's already going to know her mom's phone number. And so that's going to be one of the tests that you have to pass when you're in kindergarten. You got to know the contact information of your parents, right? It's one of the things they teach you in school these days. Do you know your parents' phone numbers? Okay? Well, then I said, "Oh, well, Hattie, tell me what it is." And she proceeded to tell me the lock screen code on her iPhone, on my wife's iPhone. She didn't tell me a telephone number. She told me her passcode for her phone. I said, "Hattie, that's not a phone number." And she said, "Yes, it is. Yes, it is." It's all she knows. Technology is all she knows. How many of you have asked a kid or a grandkid to help you figure out something on a phone or a tablet or some device? Absolutely. Again, I'm 40 years old. Sometimes I ask my oldest son to help me figure out how to do something on my phone. Access to technology has shaped that generation. Everything about them. And now the reality is we recognize that these things that they're shaped by, whether it be the Great Depression, Watergate, the dot-com boom, the internet, or access to technology, all of these things have both positive shaping effects and negative shaping effects, right? Positive, right? Think about the Great Depression. People learned how valuable saving was. Positive, right? Negative, people didn't trust institutions for a while. They didn't want anybody else to touch their money, so they buried it in their backyard. Well, let's fast forward. Access to technology. It's unbelievable how much of a gift that can be for us when we think about access to information, when we think about contacting loved ones, we think about during the year 2020, and where so many people were in hospitals, potentially dealing with the end of life alone, but technology gave them the opportunity to connect in a way that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to. A great benefit of access to technology. The downside is, oftentimes people are losing the ability to connect personally. They're easily distracted. We're reliant on these tools to do things for us that they were never intended to do. Well, let's jump back up to descriptions of the worldview, which I think makes sense in light of those things that they're shaped by. A traditionalist is obedience over individualism, right? Obedience over individualism. But then when we jump over to the Generation Z, value independence and individuality. Becomes me, right? It's about me. You see these worldview changes. Age equals seniority for the traditionalist. And if I can just be completely honest with you for a second, this is one of those things that for millennials, it's less so for Gen Z, but for people between the ages of 20 and 40, this is a struggle for people in that age demographic. Age is not seniority in their minds. Right, wrong, or indifferent. It shouldn't be determined by age. It should be determined by ability. Right? And so knowing that impacts then how do we engage people in that demographic. Right? And it's really going to bleed into some of the things we talk about later today and in a couple weeks. So worldview, age over seniority, advance through hierarchy, right? You work through the whole Chevy GMC system. You work all the way up, right? And you do the same in your career and your vocation. You come in working for General Electric at the bottom of the ladder, and you make your way up to the top at some point. Probably not to the top of GE, but you keep working your way up till you get to management, and you live there and you stay there for the rest of your career. Right? This is the way traditionalists often work. Worldview for baby boomers, though, is achievement comes after paying one's dues. Achievement begins to matter more, you see. It wasn't just, I'll work the system and see how it goes. I'm going to be here forever no matter what. I want to get somewhere. I want to do something. I want to achieve something, but I know I'm going to have to pay my dues in order for it to happen. Sacrifice for success. I don't know how many of you are in the room that are baby boomers. I know by show of hands there were several of you. But I will tell you, I've had conversations with the children of baby boomers. And I've heard almost on repeat things like, well, I know my dad loved me, but I think he loved his work more. I know my parents care about me, and I'm really thankful that they provided for me, but I don't really have a relationship with them. It makes sense when you see these characteristics, worldview of the generations. The worldview of Generation X, right? Diversity begins to matter. Right? This is coming out of the civil rights movement. And so what you see is what got passed on from one generation to the next was this growing desire to see diversity. Right? This growing desire to see diversity. Quick to move on if the employer fails to meet their needs. Right? Think about it. Age equals seniority, you advance through hierarchy, becomes achievement after paying one's dues, becomes quick to move on if their employer fails to meet their needs. Then next we see likely to leave an organization if they don't like the changes. You see the progression, right? Wholesale commitment, no matter what, to an organization becomes, well, I'm going to be here, but I got to achieve something while I'm here. Becomes, well, I'm going to be here until I don't like something. Becomes, if I don't get my way, I'm gone. Right? It's driven by that me-centered philosophy of thinking about the world, right? But it becomes the reality. Generation X also resistant to change at work, even if it affects their personal lives. The millennials then, seeking challenge and growth and development. They actually want to be developed. Again, this is anecdotal, but I've had countless people in the 20 to 40 age demographic say to me, like, nobody's ever tried to, help me. Well, I would love to do that, but I need somebody to teach me how to do it. And I know, you know, it's not universally true. People have tried to help them. People have tried. But I can remember thinking this way. When I was in my early 20s, I remember sitting down with the minister that I worked for at the time. And he asked me a question. He said, "Stephen, who are you discipling?" I said, "Well, I've got this one student that I meet with occasionally, and we talk about spiritual things and our journey with the Lord." And he said, "But no, who are you discipling?" And I remember asking him, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And he gave me this picture of this intentional relationship where you sit down one-on-one with somebody and you train them on specific things of what it means to follow the Lord and be faithful with Him. And you grow with them together, helping them in a sense, bringing them along to grow. And my response to him was, "Well, I don't know how to do that. Nobody's ever done that for me." And then he said to me, which was unbelievably convicting, he opened up his Bible and he said, "Well, it's right here." In his perspective, as a baby boomer, was that, well, no, you have everything you need to get it. My perspective as a millennial was, no, I don't get it until you give it to me. Right? Just, again, not right, wrong, or indifferent, just different perspectives on how we learn. Right? There's an expectation that those things will be taught to you in many ways. Right? But millennials often want those things to happen. Fun work environment. Work-life balance is an important thing for millennials. Willing to leave an organization, I already mentioned that, if they don't like the changes. Then Gen Z, those that are 20 and under, roughly right now. They self-identify as digital natives. Who knows what a digital native is? Anybody? Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. That's right. Right? It's taking the ideas that we find in those that study, culture and language and all of those kinds of things. Right? There's native people, there's native tongues, those kind of things. It's the idea that the digital world is the only world they've ever known. They've never known analog at all. Right? Millennials knew analog. Right? I grew up in the analog world. I listened to cassette tapes. Right? And then I was introduced to CDs. Right? I used the radio, and then I was introduced to an MP3. Right? So for Gen Z, they're the first ones that this digital world is the only world that they've ever known. Right? It's the only thing they know. They self-identify as digital natives, and they know that, which means antiquated technology is either cool because it's vintage, and you put it on a shelf, or it's just a foreign language altogether, right? Foreign language altogether. They value independence and individuality. Prefer to work with millennial managers. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Gen Z prefers to work with millennial managers? Why do they want millennials as bosses if they're going to work with somebody? They understand them, right? You know my world a little bit. Half of your life has been in my world. You know me a little bit. I've heard this said before too. You know, you can really only communicate well with people that are 1 degree of separation from you. Those that are on the same kind of plane as you. Sometimes that means intellectually. Sometimes that means in class structures, right? The differences from class to class. This is why sometimes when really wealthy people go into impoverished neighborhoods, the people there don't want them there, right? Because they have a hard time. There's too many degrees of separation. Right? The same thing I think is true generation to generation. It's a lot easier to connect with somebody that's a little bit closer to you. It's not uncommon at all for that to be the case. I prefer to work with millennial managers. They want innovative co-workers and new technologies. Right? When's the last time you said to yourself, I can't wait for the new fill in the blank to come out? Gen Z says it every second, not every day. Every second. New technology is old in a matter of minutes. It's a matter of minutes, and new technology becomes old to Gen Z. Millennials, we've got it, and we kind of like it, and we want to ride it for a little while, right? Gen X, I think it's cool. Can we use this for a few years, right? Baby boomers, okay, I'll try it, but I want to use it for the next 15 years, all right? And traditionalists, don't even want to try, all right? Very different takes on technology. All right? So what are they motivated by? Traditionalists, we see respect, recognition, long-term value, a long-term commitment. Right? You see, right, some of the struggles that we have in our churches, you can see them playing out here, can't you? Long-term commitment, where'd that go? I'll tell you where it went. Some of it's sitting in this room. God has used me in many ways that I never imagined. He continues to use me. Different seasons, through every step, different seasons and different turns, God's faithfulness, the journey never ends. When I fast forward to millennials, they're motivated by responsibility, quality of their manager, unique experiences. When I fast forward to Gen Z, diversity, personalization, individuality, creativity, you know what they're inspired by? You know what they're drawn to? Now. They want the value now. They don't want the value in 15 years. They don't want the value in the later seasons of life. They don't want the value at a different point in the journey. They believe they're on a journey, but the most important part of that journey is now, not tomorrow. Drastic differences, right, from generation to generation. Motivated by the baby boomers, right? Motivated by company loyalty. Let's stick it out. Right? These are my people. Right? I'll tell y'all one thing. It's a small thing. Sometimes it bothers me a little bit. Like people, like younger people that can jump from team to team, bandwagon fans, you know what I mean? Like it's normal now. Where I grew up, who was it? We were talking about Wake Forest. Why do I live in Winston-Salem and I'm not a Wake Forest fan? Well, it's because they didn't let me in. All right? That's why I wasn't smart enough to get into Wake Forest. But like, man, you follow a player and you jump from team to team with them. You just pick whoever's in the top 10 on SportsCenter that day nowadays. But in this room, my guess is you've got long-standing, deep love and affiliation with a school or a team. Think about coaching for 34 years, the same place. Coaches jump from place to place now. Get more money, more opportunity, more recognition. Right? These kind of things are unheard of. Loyalty seems to have gone out the window. Teamwork. Duty. Right? These things are motivators. All right, Generation X, diversity, again, a big deal. Work-life balance, personal, professional interests rather than group and company interests, right? So you start to see that independence, that personalization start to creep in among Gen X. And then your millennials are motivated by responsibility. This is, I think sometimes people think about millennials, and I promise, I'm trying to talk about all of this unbiased, not trying to defend any particular generation. But I think millennials often are said to really want to just kind of be lazy. The millennials I know, generally, they may appear to be lazy and because of the way that they present themselves. But they're highly committed to whatever it is they're committed to. It's just got to feed something inside of them that gives them that assurance that it's going to be valuable for them. Right? It's got to feed something inside of them. Lastly, I already mentioned it, but motivated by the Generation Z, right? Diversity, personalization, individuality, creativity. Communication style, this is no surprise at all, right? Personal touch and handwritten notes moves to direct messages and texts and social media. I think it's interesting if you look at the difference even between millennials and Gen Z, right? The communication styles you see, the DMs, and when I say DM, do y'all know what that means? It's a direct message, right? Usually through like another platform. So like Facebook Messenger, if you have Facebook, right, which is most common social media platform in the United States, most broadly used, okay? You can send a Facebook message. It's a separate app or a separate part of the Facebook platform, and that would be a DM. It's a direct message sent just to you through that platform, okay? So that's what DMs are. So you see those in text there, but you see a move from email to social media. Don't try to email a 12-year-old. Don't try to email an 18-year-old. Okay? And I have watched college students get in real trouble because their professors communicate in ways that for them are very antiquated. Right? But like all of us, as I would tell them, I'll tell you, sometimes we have to bend a little bit, right, in order to do what we need to do. Okay? So college students need to learn how to use their email. That's what I think. All right? But you see the difference, right? Whatever's most efficient, right? You see that turnover season happen with those that were born from in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then that move into more specific direct messaging. And so we see these things, and I think, there's no major surprises, but what it does is it begins to give us a way to shed some light on things that we know are probably true, that we've seen impact of already, but it also allows us to go, it makes sense. So what can we do to engage them? Right? Sometimes looking at a chart like this can cause us more frustration. Can't we just go back to the way it was? Right? Things were much better when we just wrote handwritten notes and talked to people face to face and occasionally called them on the telephone. Right? I don't disagree with that statement. There's times when I wish that my kids were growing up in that world. I wish my kids could go out in the summer at 8 a.m. and come back at 5 p.m. when my wife rings the dinner bell. I wish. For the early part of my childhood, I went wherever I want on my bike, and everything was fine. My parents were never worried about it. They weren't scared about what I was going to get exposed to, or who might find me, or who might pick me up, or who might show up. Now, if I want to go on a 30-minute walk with my wife, I feel like I got to lock every door and tell my kids not to leave. I wish in so many ways that my kids were growing up in a different world. But what this reminds me of is that I can't avoid change, nor can I avoid my current reality. I can't. Change is an unavoidable reality. And the reality is, all of us in this room have benefited from some of these changes too. Right? We've benefited from some of these changes. It may be how you heard about today. Maybe that was through a personal conversation or something you saw in person. That's possible. It may have been through an email. Right? How you communicate with the people in your meeting. How quickly you're able to connect with your kids, your grandkids, and others. I mean, FaceTime is one of the greatest inventions in the world, I think. My parents live in Florida. I see them twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. I can see them, and we can talk. We all know it's not quite the same, but it allows us a chance to connect. Change is an unavoidable reality. Some of that change has benefited us. But the reality, we cannot deny the reality of our current situation. We can't deny it. And though we desperately may want to go back, in many ways, and for very good reasons at times, we can't. We can't. Let's talk about some more general statistics, specifically of millennials and Gen Z. Okay? So in the U.S., this was in 2021, on the left there. Traditionalists made up 5.76% of the population. Baby boomers, 21.16%. Gen X, 19.83%. Millennials, 21.75%. Gen Z, 20.67%. Millennials and Gen Z, right, making up over 42% of the population in 2021. Right? Statistics on demographics always have a lag to them. Does anybody know what year we're in? 2023. Does anybody here know anybody that was born in 1925 that's still living? A couple people probably. Yeah. The reality is, and the Bible teaches us this, that the Lord has numbered our days. Also says that He knows the number of hairs on our head, which I feel like is way too easy for some of us. I don't think that's fair. Right? That 5.67 number isn't 5.76 rather. It's not 5.76 anymore. Right? So we're probably talking about closer to 50% of the population now is millennial or Gen Z. Nearly half of the population of the U.S. is 40 or under. Right? Which makes sense. 40 and under, okay, that's great. But the reality is that's changing rapidly in the workplace even. Right? We see it played out. Traditionalists, 2%. This is up to 2020. Labor statistics are even slower. Baby boomers, 25%. Gen X, 33%. Millennials, 35%. Gen Z, 5%. That Gen Z number is rising rapidly. Right? Though it's harder to get into college than it ever has been before. Right? I wouldn't have gotten into NC State today. All right? 20-some years ago, I could get into NC State. Still not sure how that happened either. Today, there's no way I could. Right? It's gotten harder than ever before to get into college. More expensive than ever before to get into college. And so you know what Gen Z is already showing the trend of doing? Not going to college. Unless their vocation requires it. So unless they're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, why go to college? It's money that I could save or don't have. It's really hard to do, right? And so what you see is the Gen Z people that are going to college either have a vocational plan that requires them to go to college, or their mom and dad are pushing them really, 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 really hard. And they're probably pretty unhappy about it. Right? So that's what you see. That's who's making up the workforce now. Right? But more than that, a few other points that I want to make. As of 2020, 15% of millennials aged 25 to 35 are living with their parents. Let me go back for just a second. As of the same year, 35% of millennials, or the workforce is made up of 35% millennials. That's millions and millions and millions and millions of people. And 15% of them are still living with their parents. You know what's interesting is if you go back to 1900, they were still living with their parents. They were married and had kids, but they were still living at home. Now, they don't get married, they don't have kids, but they're living at home. There's almost this element of tradition that's creeping its way back in. But what is driving it? Cost. Income, right? People have to pay bills. If I can save money, it's better for me if I just live here, right? Have any of you had that? Your kids lived with you for a little bit as adults? Yeah. Very common. Very, very common. 52% of U.S. Gen Zers are non-Hispanic whites, most racially diverse generation ever in the U.S. Right? 52% are non-Hispanic whites, right? Based on the way that statistics are drawn up, if you've done any demographic studies or if you've taken, right, a census survey, non-Hispanic white, right, which has traditionally been the majority. What I've heard through other statisticians is that by the year 2040, non-Hispanic white will no longer be the majority in America of any age. Most likely the trends are looking like that could happen as early as 2035. So in the next 12 years in the United States, no longer will likely, right? These are all trends and patterns and all those kind of things, so it's estimation, it's prediction, but no longer will non-Hispanic whites be the majority in America. Interesting, right? 48% of Gen Z is stressed out and unhappy. So 48%, right? 48% of people under the age of 22 are stressed out and unhappy. It explains the crisis of depression and anxiety that we're seeing among teenagers. It explains the crisis of suicide that we're seeing in younger demographics. Suicide in recent years has actually become glorified among younger generations. It's been celebrated by many. Right? Dr. Kevorkian used to do something, right, that was looked at as unbelievably terrible to help people in their lives. But now what we're seeing is that it's normative among the younger generation to celebrate people taking their own. Right? Why? In many ways, we're seeing they're stressed out and unhappy. Why are they stressed out and unhappy? Because the pressures on them are incredibly high, and their desires for personal satisfaction and happiness and independence are also really high, and these things just aren't measuring up. They're not adding up the same. Gen Z spends on average 2 hours a day, not on a device, not in front of a screen, on YouTube. When's the last time anybody in this room spent 2 hours in one day on YouTube? All right? Okay, thank you for your honesty, Roger.
Yeah, I was watching Taylor Tilly in the indoor track.
Okay, so you were watching. Okay, fair enough. I have YouTube TV. That's the way I watch TV at my house. Okay? But this is talking about like watching YouTube, like videos on YouTube, right? And it's, if you've ever talked to somebody that's had this issue, but it's crazy common among Gen Zers especially, but you see it even among younger millennials. You have got people, it's like this hole that you watch a video. You know what YouTube does when a video's over? Plays another one, right? It recommends stuff. And if you don't do something within 15, 20 seconds, whatever it is, it'll queue up the next one. All right? And when it recommends something and you go, oh, well, that looks fun too. And then that one ends and it's another recommendation. That looks good. Or I tuned out for a second and it auto-played the next thing. I'm watching another. Next thing you know, 2 hours a day on average. If you know anything about averages, you know what that means? Some that are watching a whole lot more. All right? I've got 4 Gen Zers in my home. None of them are on YouTube for 2 hours a day. Which means that there's at least 4 others that have a whole lot more than 2 hours. Right? That's how averages work. Lastly, you see there, millennials are delaying marriage and starting families later compared to previous generations. Have you seen this? All right? Marriage is getting delayed. Having children is getting delayed. My wife and I, we had our first child when we were 25. Okay? I remember at the time feeling like I was the only person I knew my age that had a kid. If I was to have a kid at 25 now, I might be the only person my age that had a kid. We got married at 22. I remember thinking, I'm a bit of an achiever and a competitive person, right? So some of these things are true of me. Okay? And so I kind of liked that I beat everybody to marriage. I thought that was pretty cool. But it's unheard of in so many places now. Right? Delaying marriage, starting families later compared to other generations. A few other statistics. Right? 45% of millennials say that their families attended religious services weekly growing up. That means nearly half people in your communities that are between the ages of 20 and 40 went to a religious service weekly growing up. I think that's pretty high. It'd be interesting then to do a follow-up statistical study on how many of them today attend religious services weekly. My hunch is it would be significantly lower. Right? But it's not because of upbringing necessarily. Is what we're seeing here. 40% of Gen Z say that their families attended religious services weekly growing up. So what's the trend? 45% among millennials, 40% among Gen Z. It's going down. Right? Going down. 28% of Gen Z says that they've met friends at church. What percentage of baby boomers do you think met friends at church? Would you say they met friends at church over the years? 70%, 80%, probably, right? Gen Z, 9% identify as atheists and 9% identify as white evangelical Protestants. Here's what that's pointing out. There's as many white evangelical Protestants in America among Gen Zers as there are atheists. Pretty alarming, right? Obviously, the numbers beyond whites matter tremendously, but to make the point that we're seeing numbers of atheists, people identifying as atheists rising, people identifying as Christians, evangelical Protestants, declining. Millennials are the first generation in which Christians are minority. People between the ages of 20 and 40. First generation in American history, as long as statistics have been being taken, where Christians are actually the minority. 16% of church attenders dropped out during the pandemic. Does that seem high, low? What do you think? Sounds about right, right? Church attendance, which is really interesting how statistics work. Church attendance dropped on average by about 30%. From February of 2020, January of 2020, to the spring or summer of 2021, about 30%. All right? So half of those people, they still haven't come back. Right? This is a very interesting statistic, and I'll tell you why in just a second after I read it. But this number of people per generation read the Bible with their family at least once a week growing up. How many of you would say it's a good practice for you to read the Bible as a family in your home? Yeah, I think we would probably all agree with that. Lifeway research years ago came out, this was probably 7 years ago. It was in so about 2015, 2016, came out with research that said that they studied 20 and 30 somethings, and they asked them lots of questions about their current faith, their current situation as it relates to God, the church, relationship with Jesus, faithfulness, those kind of things. And then they asked them questions about their experience growing up. And what they found is that one factor that shaped them more than anything else. One factor that if they did this in their home growing up, that they were much more likely, like 70 to 80% more likely, to be currently engaged in the church. You know what it was? They read the Bible. 70-some%, if they read the Bible in their home with their parents as a child, as 20 and 30-somethings were engaged in the church. Which, if you look at the number of 20 and 30-somethings that are engaged in the church, that's really telling about what was happening when that generation was children and what wasn't happening in many homes, right? So it's fascinating to me to think about some of those things. All right, just a few more things I'll mention real quick. Okay? Gen Z, more inclined toward virtual worship than conventional gatherings. Okay? Have you seen that? All right, they don't mind a screen. It's not because it's fulfilling, it's because it's normal. It's easy. It's accessible. I get to control it, right? Paul and I were talking about this just a little while ago, right? Because of his work during the pandemic, right? And helping you all to be able to have the opportunity to live stream gatherings and your meetings and all of these things. Well, what happened is this became normative for some people. But what many found, and maybe you experienced this, I know at the time when all of that happened in 2020, I was serving at a church in just outside Nashville, Tennessee. And we did not meet in person from the middle of March of 2020 to the beginning of June of 2020. It was short-lived for us in terms of we had to do things differently after that, for sure. But I remember the first Sunday that we met in person again. And I just remember inside feeling so satisfied, like I had been parched and needed water, and I finally got a drink. Maybe you experienced that when you didn't meet in person for a season. Or maybe it was a health issue. Or maybe it was an extended work requirement that kept you out of meeting, right? For a period of time. And then you get back into that environment and it feels so satisfying. Well, Gen Zers, their norm in life is to watch things on screens. And the majority of them, right, 40% only, so 60% don't go to church weekly or didn't go to church weekly when they were in their parents' home. I can watch it online. It's just as satisfying, right? But it's because they haven't experienced the depth and the richness of what it's like to be together face-to-face and in person. But that is their reality. Millennials and Gen Z are very spiritual in many ways, but they're driven by authenticity and individuality, right? Have you ever had that conversation with a younger person who said, well, I'm spiritual, but, all right? What they're saying is, there's something inside of me that knows what you're saying is probably true, but I'd prefer to do things my own way, right? Characteristic of the generation. Both those generations, it makes perfect sense in many ways. Not necessarily good or right, but it makes sense when you think about generational differences. There's more non-white millennials attending church than white millennials right now. Diversity. High priority, a beautiful, unique thing among you all. There's equality, a care and concern for social justice. Right? There's more diversity among millennials engaged in churches right now, maybe than ever before. And for the first time in recorded history in the U.S., church membership is not the majority. For the first time in recorded history, less than 50% of the U.S. population self-identifies as a church member. First time in U.S. history. It's a long time, right? But this is recorded U.S. history. Yes, Mike? So it's interesting. It's a very good question, Mike. If you didn't hear him, does that concept of being comfortable in front of a screen, does it apply to other experiences, other spaces, other events in their lives. And the reality is it doesn't. And the reason is because they experienced those things on a regular basis before. Does that make sense? And so, whereas church involvement was already low among Gen Z before the pandemic, these other things, ball games and concerts and these other experiences that we have face to face, those things were normative for them and their families already. And so now, I was in Florida last week. I went to a spring training baseball game, y'all, which, to be really clear, if you don't know anything about Major League Baseball, they don't matter. Like, spring training games don't matter at all, right? And currently, just a little bit of more sports information for you, the World Baseball Classic is going on, which means the majority of the high-name, high-recognition players in Major League Baseball aren't playing in spring training right now because they're playing for their country in the World Baseball Classic. And I went and watched the Braves and the Phillies play in Clearwater, Florida, this past Tuesday in front of a sellout crowd. A sellout crowd for a spring training baseball game where the big name players weren't even there. That was already there. That was normative for them to go to those places in person, to be there and experience those things in person. Church was not. Because the statistics told us prior to the pandemic that the average church attender went how many times a month? 1 to 2, right? It's 1.3 something, okay? 1 to 2 times a month. It wasn't normative to go to church in person. It was normative to go to concerts and ball games and all those other experiences that we have in person. So it hasn't translated. And if you know anything about the entertainment industry, right, you've got the movie side of it. Oh, I can watch a movie by myself because I go to the movie theater and I watch it in the dark anyway. I can invite my friends over and we can watch it. That's fine, okay? But the entertainment industry tried to survive during the pandemic through all of these virtual events. But if you know anybody, we were living just outside Nashville when the pandemic hit, right? The center of the music world, right? I had friends live down the street from me that were in my church that worked full-time in the music industry. That's what they did for a living. And if you weren't on staff with a major, like, high-shelf, top-shelf artist, you were paid by the gig. Those people that are on staff with, like, top-shelf artists, like #1 artists, they're salaried, okay? Everybody else had no money. They had no income. The virtual things weren't making it meet. It wasn't working, right? And so as soon as they could, they were back on the road, right? Because people were dying for that again because people weren't engaging in entertainment the same ways, that they had before. It's a great question. Great question. So, that's a lot of information, I know. Here's what I want us to do. It is 2:13. So for the next 6 or 7 minutes, I want you to get into groups. Let me pause there. Is there anything surprising that you're hearing or seeing? Anything you're shocked by? My hunch is not much of it is surprising, right? It might be alarming. It might hurt your heart, make you sad, right? And that's understandable. I believe if you've got a pulse and you've got a conscience and you care about people, it's certainly discouraging to hear, okay? But not much is surprising, I don't think. I want you to get into groups, and I'm going to give you 3 questions to work on, okay? 3 questions are this. Approximately, you're estimating, okay? You're not a social scientist. You don't have to give a specific number. You don't need to, use a straw poll real quick or anything like that. But approximately, what percentage of your meetings are Gen Z and millennials? So I'll give you a number, 40 and under. Approximately what percentage? You don't have to give me a number of people, but percentage. Number of people in your meetings. And when I say that, I'm going to go ahead and use kind of the general statistics. The going rate right now would be once a month. That they're there once a month or more. Okay? What's that? Attending once a month or more in person. That's right. So what percentage are millennials or Gen Z? 40 or under. In your community, where do people 40 and under spend their time? Right? This is subjective, I know, right? But you know things, you see people, you go places, you have kids, right? And then the final question, why do you want people 40 and under in your meetings? Okay? Any questions on that? Fantastic. Is everybody awake now that lunch is over and you've heard me talk for an hour? All right, fantastic. All right, jump into your groups. We'll go till, I'm going to give you a time, all right? We'll go till 2:23, all right, 2:23.
Steve, you gonna have enough sheets there? There's another one here.
I think we'll be, well, yeah, I'll grab that one after this. That'd be great. Tell you what, I can, oh, that's me. Go ahead and pull this one off here. Is it caught on there? Oh, there we go. Got it. Perfect. Yep, I think so. There's a little tab on that side up in there. I don't know if you can see it. It's on that. Oh, there we go. It's over it now. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
If it's all the children in the church and preaching on Sundays, or all the children in the church?
I'll let y'all have some freedom in
Just
that.
an average? Okay.
Yeah, just,
Because ours is different.
yeah, I would think of like, if you think about over the course of a month, the number of people that are engaged in something
Something in the church.
what percentage of those are 40 and under?
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Hey, I'm going to say one thing real quick. Just got a really good question. Think about when you're trying to think of a percentage over the course of a month, right? If you have 100 people in the course of a month that participate in something regular, one regular meeting in your church, that would be the whole pie. What slice of that whole pie is 40 and under? Does that make sense? So you're using a whole month basically to measure this, right? Which is the norm in the church world now. We measure engagement in a month at a time, all right? So how many people are there in a given month at the different things? Unique individuals, right? And then what percentage of those are 40 and under? Good question. What's that? Yeah, where are they? Is it, No, just generally, where do they spend their time? So is it ball fields? Is it free time? Yeah, all of those things would be good categories to add to, because they are working, they're at school, those things. So anything they're spending their time doing, that would be representative of many of them. So if you've got an example where it's like, well, I know this one 35-year-old, couple, and they spend all their time at the racetrack, but they're the only people that do that. I wouldn't put that into like a category. Does that make sense? Good question. All right, why don't you take 2 more minutes? 2 more minutes. All right. All right. I know it felt like not much time, but I want us to get to a good landing place here in the next 35 minutes. So let's do this. We're going to hit this first question. I think it's a pretty quick hit. And so we'll go around the room. Each of you share what percentage you think. Again, I know there's different meetings. And so what percentage of your meetings are 40 and under? We'll start with this table right here.
We said post-COVID 40, pre-COVID 30.
So pre-COVID 30?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, pre-30. Yeah, pre-40.
Let's talk now. Let's say now, right now.
30%.
30%. Okay. All right. Next table. Yeah.
Well, his church said 30%, I'm saying 40%.
Okay.
For my church, we're 2 different meetings.
Okay. All good. Give me any numbers you've got.
32.8.
32.8.
Yeah, we
How about that?
averaged the 2 meetings.
You averaged them. So what were the numbers? 35 and 30? Okay. That's good. All right, back here.
My church is 8%.
8?
Over 50%.
Over what?
Over 50.
50?
20%,
20?
yeah.
Okay.
5.
5.
We're trying to figure it out, but we think around 22%, but we've got different amounts here in our church.
What were the different what different amounts did you have?
We had 22%. Hugh says very few at his, maybe 5%. Okay. they're all
5,
different.
20, and
They're
40?
all different.
25. Okay. Okay?
We had between 10 and 30.
10 and 30%?
Yeah.
We'll call it 20 then. Does that sound good? It's right in the middle almost.
Roughly 30%.
30, okay?
30%.
30, okay? So again, I went to NC State. We missed one. Okay, hold on.
25 to 35.
25 to 35. We're going to call that 30 also then. All right. So on average, generally, right, there's some big movement. 5% to 50% is a big difference, okay? So a couple things to note on this. One, you're not all in the same boat. Okay? You're not all in the same boat. And I recognize that. Which means this, one rubber stamped approach isn't going to do it. But I will tell you, I'll go back to this. Personal relationships will be at the core of this no matter what your current percentage is. Personal relationships will be at the core of this no matter what your current percentage is. But I would tell you that if you're anywhere in this 30% plus, even 20% plus, I'm a little encouraged by that. I'm actually quite encouraged by that. Now, granted, the population of the U.S. is 50% this age and younger, almost. 45%. If the percentage of your church is better than the percentage of the population, you're doing pretty good, right? But there's some unique things you're going to have to think about too. Is the population in the community where your meeting exists? Right? If the population of your community averages age 55, okay, well then it's likely that your meeting is going to trend a little bit older as well. Okay, those things are normative, right? You need to be representative of your community. That's what you want to be. You don't want to just be young for the sake of being young. You want to be representative of your community. Right? And when you're representative of your community, that's very healthy. Very, very healthy. And so these numbers, though they give us a glimpse into some of where some of you are at, right, they don't tell the whole story. And I recognize that. Right? But that's why this second question is important as well. Okay? Where do they spend their time in your community? Where are 40 and under spending their time? Let's do this instead of going table to table. I'll save your legs for a minute, Paul. Let me hear from maybe 10 of you. The ball field. All right. So I said 10 of you, but just to be clear, I might want you to do it one at a time because I'm slow. All right, so I heard ball field. Let me get another one. Work? Work. Did you say watching YouTube? That's great. Well, here's the deal. The reality is that's a category in and of itself, not YouTube, but online, right? How many of you in this room have an iPhone, an Apple iPhone? Okay, so several people do, and it doesn't matter if you do or not. I just don't know the Android world that well. Every week, and it ironically happens on Sunday mornings while I'm at my church, okay, I get that screen time report. Terrible, right? Apple doesn't care about your worship. Maybe they do, way too much. But it tells me how much time I've spent on my phone, right, that week, okay? It's not nothing. It's usually a number that I go, really? That much a day? Right? People are spending their time online. It's a real space. It used to be a theoretical space that people went. It is now a space, a legitimate space that people spend their time. People go somewhere when they go online. It's a legitimate space, and so we can't discredit that. Yes?
We were talking, and I told him it's not unusual. We still have a 20-something at home to go in when he's not at work, and he was talking to somebody, and long story short, he was playing chess with somebody in Japan.
Yep, I put that in that online category. The online gaming world is unbelievably massive. Did you know you can get a college scholarship for playing video games now? Yes. Esports, it's a thing. That's right. You can get a college scholarship for playing video games. What do you tell your kids as a parent when they're playing video games? It's going to ruin your life. You'll never go to school. You'll never make anything of yourself. And now you can go to school and make something of yourself by playing video games. It's amazing, right? But it's part of this online world because, and this is something I would tell you as a caution, if you have kids or you've got grandkids that spend time playing video games. Video games are not what they used to be. You used to play a video game sitting on your couch with a remote control that was tethered to the gaming system, and all you heard was what came out of the TV from the video game that was generated by the video game creators. And all you said, only people you talked to, is the people you were sitting beside playing. Now you have a full-blown conversation. The kids and adults, because there's a lot of adults playing video games, I'm not one of them, they're actually having full-blown conversations and interactions. It's real-time conversation with people that they don't know, with people that they've never met, with people that they have no idea who they really are. It is an unbelievable danger. An unbelievable danger, the world of online video games. But it's all part of this online space, right? That lots of people are spending their time there. What else? What's... Yep.
Boy Scouts, 4-H that takes them out to do things away from the church.
Absolutely. Yeah, good. Yes. Yep. You know, one of the fastest growing groupings of ads that you see, especially when you're watching sports and things like that, which are some of the primary audiences, but also if you're watching some kind of ongoing show like an Amazing Race or Survivor. I don't know. I'm not endorsing things. I'm just saying the names of stuff. But as you see VRBO, right? Airbnb, right? You see Hotels.com. Travel is at an unbelievably height, like a high amount of people. People are constantly traveling. Right? My wife and I have this conversation regularly because we can't afford to do this kind of stuff. And so she's like, well, you know, my college roommate, they're in Venice for the week. Venice? Like in Florida? Nope. Across the ocean in Italy. Like, okay, cool. You know, hey, these friends that we know from church, yeah, they're down in the Caribbean this week. I'm like, how do people do this? I don't know how people do it. But it is a reality. People are spending their money on experiences. If I can tell you, I've heard it 1,000 times from parents that are millennial age, sometimes even Gen Xers as well, right? I'm going to spend my money on experiences, not stuff. I'm going to spend my money on experiences, not stuff. I love it as a parenting principle. Well, I don't want to buy my kids more stuff. I want to go places with them and enjoy things together.
I was in charge of our Rotary Club silent auction, and our president got up and said, don't donate stuff. People don't want stuff.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Right? Silent auction. We don't. Yep.
Things,
That's right.
cruises.
Yep. Yep. People don't. That's right. That's what they want. Right? Want a place to get away. That's good. What else? Yes.
Starbucks or the local pub.
Yep.
A place where the friends are gathered.
Right, so I'm going to write up here third spaces, and what that means is it's not home, it's not work, it's not the ball, it's a sort of a neutral space where I can go and just be. I might go there to connect with other people, I might go there, put my AirPods in, put my head down and just focus in my own little world. It may be for work, it may be for personal use, but third spaces are a huge use of people in younger generations. They go there to get away, they go there to connect, but it's neutral ground, and I think it's very interesting that people want neutral ground. And when I think about some of the things that you all have talked about, right, that are unique about you, right, some of these things, all people are equal, that's a draw. It's a draw. People want neutral ground. They want to be in a place that's safe and that's neutral. It's not your place, it's not my place, it's neutral, right? That's what third spaces would be. Anything else? Restaurants. Yep. Might fall into that too. So here, I'm going to put eateries because I want it to be clear that what people go there to do, right, though it sometimes is eat, it's really a connection point for people. right? But there's something about the food world that's got an experience component to it too that people are into. You know, people will drive all over the country to go to certain barbecue restaurants or go to certain taco places or whatever, right? You got people that'll go all over the place to do that. And because I'm not really good at spelling the word restaurant. That's the other reason I wrote eateries. So, what else? Any others? Shopping, yeah. I'm going to caveat this one though. Why do you think that is? Online. It's another online space. There's this little thing that some of you may have heard of called what? Amazon. All right? It's changed the world. I mean, literally. It's changed the world. Like, I get aggravated when I order something online and I can't get it in 2 days. What's that? Or the next day, that's right. Yeah, when I lived in Nashville, it was awesome. I could get it the same day. I could order it online and get it at my house, at my door the same day. It was incredible. It was awesome, right? Not so much in Winston-Salem, but it is. People are spending money, right? Income, right, is rising. I mean, how many of you have had that shocking conversation with your kid when they tell you how much their first real job is earning them and gone, you're making what? And they're still living at home. Right? That's when you start charging rent. That's exactly right. All right? You tell them that their first mistake as an adult was to tell you how much they were making. All right? And so I'm going to take a cut of that every month. Perfect. That's right. That's good. Now, all these are real places, right? Ball field. Okay? I'm going to tell you my own story a little bit through these real quick. Okay? My family, I've got 4 kids. 3 of them play sports. My 2 boys play basketball and baseball. Baseball is their primary thing. They do a couple other things at their school too. My daughter swims, likes gymnastics, but it's way too expensive for us, so we don't do gymnastics other than to say, hey, you should go down outside and do flips in the yard. Right? The ball field is a real thing in my family. During the summer, or spring and summer, typically, my boys will have somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 practices between the 2 of them, baseball practices a week, and somewhere in the neighborhood of, between the 2 of them, 9 to 12 baseball games in a given week between their school team and their travel teams when they're playing both. Right? We spend a lot of time at the ball field in my family. Right? My wife and I both work. My wife works part-time. She works about 15 to 20 hours a week at the school where my kids go. I work full-time. And I won't tell you what that number of hours is, but 40 hours is no longer a full-time job, I don't think. Right? I think 40-hour work weeks are a thing of the past. I think 50-hour work weeks are more of a norm again, have become norm. Right? So we work. My phone tells me I spend about 2 hours a day on my screen. So I'm spending time online. I still haven't figured out how I'm doing that. I think it's because I'm doing work on my phone sometimes, but whatever. Right? Clubs, right? I mentioned my daughter swims. Right? They enjoy doing those other things outside of the home. Vacations. I did go to Florida this past week, but contrary to how that appears, we don't vacation much. Unless, and I'm just a real thing for a lot of millennials and a lot of Gen Zers will be as well, unless somebody takes us like our parents. My vacations, I go visit my parents in Florida. They haven't always lived there. They moved there in 2018 because I grew up in Winston-Salem. Okay? Or I go with my in-laws to the beach once a year in the summer. That's what we do. All right? So we do vacations, but it's not too elaborate for us. Third spaces, one of my favorite places to be in the world is in a bit of a busy room where I don't know anybody. Not because I want to interact with everybody, but because I can be in my own little world and not have to worry about anything else going on. I love to go to a Starbucks or to a local coffee shop and sit, and I put my earbuds in, right? And I focus and I get some things done. It's a great place. I enjoy being in places like that. We do go out to eat way too much because sometimes our schedule doesn't permit us to have time to eat at home. For sure, shopping. I try to limit that in my family as much as possible because shopping requires money. But But the reality is we do most of our shopping online. My wife does her grocery shopping online, and she pulls up in front of the store, and they put it in the back of her car. We don't go in the store much. We need one thing, and I'm on the way home from work. I might stop and get something. But usually we do our shopping online. We do a lot of things on Amazon. A few weeks ago, one of my kids had a birthday, and I bought him something online, then it wasn't from Amazon, and it took it like a week and a half to get there, and it came after his birthday, and I was really mad about it, right? Because online things are supposed to come within 2 days, right? I think these are really accurate pictures of probably where the people in your communities under 40 are spending their time. So, last question. Not last question of the day, but last question from this section here. All right? Why do you want these people in your meetings? Let's just popcorn it again right here. Yes?
Well, our tables said, well, people need the Lord.
That's right.
And Christians don't really, we're not supposed to just sit around and let people go off into eternity without at least trying
That's right.
to share Lord with them.
Yeah.
And it's also how we grow, because we're not going to live forever, and somebody's got to come on into the church for it to remain alive.
That's great. It's how we grow. People need the Lord. That's right.
Your stats alone, look at how many millennials and Gen Z have misunderstanding.
Yep.
So many of them think, as long as I pay my taxes, I'm not a bad person, I'm going to go to heaven.
That's right. And you know, we've glamorized in many ways whatever the antithesis of faith is. Doubt. I don't know what exactly that would, but we've glamorized that in our culture, right? To be anti something that's established with a history is actually kind of cool. If you're against those things that are established and have a history, then you're independent, then you're autonomous, then you're innovative, then you're entrepreneurial, right? And so what you've got is there's a whole lot of misunderstanding among younger generations. Certainly, I think it's fair to want to clear that up for their sake and for their eternity, right? It's good. What else?
We got care about their spiritual destination. We want to use their talents, and then we also need the help of communicating with the next generation.
It's getting late in the day. I'm forgetting how to spell. All right. It's good. What else?
Fellowship with believers, we need each other.
Yep.
There'll be times in our lives that we truly need other believers around us. Sickness, death in the family.
Yep.
Those types of things, we need each other.
Yep. And you see it, right? When those times happen, right? Again, I've been a minister for nearly 20 years. When tragedy strikes, when death hits the family, people call. It happens every day. Right? People want answers. They need help. We need each other. It's absolutely right. What else? Yep. Yeah.
Ours was a selfish reason that we want to see our church be here in the future without the next generation gets through it. That limits our hope in some ways.
Yeah. I would venture to guess that nobody in the room feels differently. Everybody's on the same page with you on that. I don't think it's selfish, because your church growing and surviving over the long haul isn't just about you. Ultimately, it's about people coming to know the Lord, right? So that's not selfish. And I want to ease that if any of you feel that. Like, it's selfish for us to want these people. Now, it can be, don't get me wrong, but I can't judge your motives. I trust your motives based on the things I've heard today. You want people to know the Lord. You know there's a better way. You know there's a better way to live. You know there's a place where there's peace and joy and happiness. You want people to know that. That's a good thing. Yeah.
I don't know if this is a category, but identification. If somebody walks into a church and doesn't see anybody like them,
Yeah.
Their age bracket at all,
Yep.
your chances of keeping them, I think, is going down.
Yeah, I think that's a real thing, right? This will come back to what I mentioned earlier. One of the things I struggled with at one point in my own journey was inviting people to a place that I didn't see people like them, right? I was afraid to invite because I'm going to invite them into an environment where they're going to go, where are people like me? And I think we want to create environments where people we know will feel comfortable coming in because they see others. But here's the deal. It's got to start somewhere, right? It has to start somewhere. Has to. What else? Anything else? Here's what I would say. An important question that I want you to begin thinking about now, okay? To begin thinking about now, and we're going to revisit when we come back in several weeks, okay? How can you get people to see this? How can you get people to know who you are? How can you get people to know what you're passionate about? How can you get people to be introduced to Jesus? For your churches to grow, how can this happen? Right? How can this happen? I want you to begin thinking about that. And we're going to talk more about that the next time that we get together. What I want to do for just the last couple minutes is I want to answer the third question that you've got there today in part 3. That's right, part 3 is only going to be 10 minutes, so hold on. It's going to be quick, all right? But the last part is what is true, okay? Who are we? Who are they? And what is true, right? What is true? I want to remind you. Well, let me ask you a question real quick. Where do you look to discover what's true? Is that the Bible, right? I heard it mentioned earlier. The written word of God is something you're passionate about, right? That's where we look. And so here, let's ask this real quick. What does the Bible say about who is valuable? What's true about who is valuable? In Genesis 1, 26 and 27. God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them. Who's valuable? Everybody. Everybody. Why? Because they were knit together, as Psalm 139 says. They were knit together by the hand of God Himself. One of the things I love about your passion is this idea that all people are equal. I would take that to also mean all people are valuable. Right? This is why you're passionate about the involvement of women in diversity and leadership. Why? Because all people are valuable and equal. Why are all people valuable? Well, the Bible says so. It teaches us that God is the one who gives value, which means I don't get to decide who's valuable. You don't get to decide who's valuable. God has decided who's valuable, and it's every person that He knit together, Psalm 139, in His womb, in their mother's womb, which is everybody at every stage of life, in any nation, any ethnicity, right? Everybody is valuable. Looking ahead, though, what does the Bible say about the value of people being together? Hebrews 10 talks about us encouraging one another and not neglecting meeting together as is the habit of some, but doing that more and more and more and more. What does the Bible say about the value of people being together? That it's incredibly important for people to be together. All people are valuable, and it's incredibly important for all people to be together. Psalm 27 right? As iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. It's good for us. We need each other, as we were reminded of just a second ago. And then, what does the Bible say about the value of the generations connecting? I've said it about 600 times today, but I went to NC State University, all right? And when I was there, and I went to football games, I went to every football game for 4 years. I got there really early so I could be loud and crazy on the front row. It was awesome. And my favorite moments were when one side of the stadium, you've probably been in a football stadium or a basketball arena where this has happened maybe, but one side of the stadium would yell, "Red." The other side would say back, "White." "Red." "White." And they'd go back and forth. We'd go back and forth and back and forth, and then all of a sudden everybody would just let out this guttural scream of excitement. All right? If you're familiar with Psalm 145, it talks about a very similar idea. It says that one generation will commend the works of God to another. But it's not a one-way thing. It's a dialogue. It's not a monologue. Because it says in response, the other generation will praise the Lord. And in verses 3 through 7 of Psalm 145, you see this picture of a back and forth. God's done great things. Praise the Lord. God's done great things. Praise the Lord. God's done great things. Praise the Lord. God's done great things. And it's like the crescendo in that football game. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Encouraging the generations from one generation to another. It's a beautiful picture that we see in the Old Testament in Psalm 145. In 2 Timothy 2, right? Paul's reminding young Timothy, a young minister, hey, what's been entrusted to you, make sure that you find other young men to entrust this to. One generation to another. Titus 2, young women or older women are to teach younger women. Older men are to teach younger men. This is the picture of the Bible. The generations are to be connecting. And I think it's incredibly important for us to think about that and to remember that as we think about the generational dynamics within the meetings. And this desire, this is not just a good idea to connect the generations. People are valuable. Who? All people. Being together is valuable. The Bible teaches us. And so it says, do not neglect meeting together. We need to be sharpened by one another. And the generations desperately need one another. Now, the reality is the average person in America may not necessarily functionally believe this, that we desperately need other generations. Think about the days that you've had that were really maybe down. And if you've got kids or grandkids, you've just had a rough day, a rough week. And that kid or that grandkid calls or shows up. And the joy that it brought you in a sad moment. I think about moments in my own life when an older man came alongside of me in a hard time, put his arm around me and said, "It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right." We need one another. We desperately need one another, and it's not just a good idea. It's actually a biblical idea. It's God's idea that we need one another. And I want to use that again to affirm to you your desire for this among your meetings. It's good for you to want this. You've got something that's worth sharing. You've got something that everybody needs. You've got good motivation, right? And so what we're going to do next time when we get together is talk more then about what do we do now? How do we begin to do this? I'm going to fast forward a little bit here for the sake of time. I'm swiping a lot because I'm fast forwarding quite a bit. Okay, I'm going to flip through some things because I want you to, I know, y'all are like, oh, wait, we're missing all of that? That's right, I promise. Okay, homework. Everybody loves homework, don't you? Yeah, homework's the best. Here's what I want to encourage you to do over the next 4 weeks. And I realize that some of you have different things that are preventing you at your meetings. You've got events going on, outreach events that are happening. I heard from a couple of you. Totally understand that. I would really encourage you to send somebody from your meeting if you're able to. Make sure that folks are here as we really get into the weeds of what it is that we're going to be, how we're connecting with these generations. This is what I want to encourage you to do over the next 4 weeks. Build an intentional relationship with somebody 18 to 40 years old. Build an intentional relationship with somebody that's 18 to 40 years old. It may be a new relationship, it may not. It may be that it's somebody in a place that you go regularly already. It may be a neighbor that you know, but you don't know all that well. But to build and to foster, try your best to foster a relationship with somebody that's 18 to 40 years old. Okay? It may be someone that was historically connected to your meeting at one point. Maybe they grew up there. They're no longer there, but they're still in your community, and you want to reach out to them. That may be a perfect kind of person, but I want you to try to be intentional about building a relationship with somebody that's 18 to 40 years old. And here's what I want you to do. Don't show up with all the answers for them. I want you to try to learn from them. Okay? Try to learn from them. How do you do that? Well, glad you asked. Remember what I said? There's power in questions. Have a conversation. And let your words, let your sentences end with question marks. Hey, could I hear your story? Tell me about your journey. Did you grow up in the area? About your family? What's your story? What are some unique qualities of you and your peers, your generation? Tell them, hey, me and some of my friends, we've been talking about the generations. I'd love to know from your perspective, what are some of the unique qualities of your generation? What's an average week look like for you? You spend your time at the ball field, at work, online? What's an average week look like for you? Maybe for your family, if that's applicable. Where do you and your peers spend your time? Similar question, right? And you don't have to just have these written down in front of you and work down the list or anything. Have a conversation with them, right? Let it feel natural. Have you ever gone to a church, to a meeting, a gathering, right? Would you mind sharing about that experience with me? I'd love to hear about it. I'm a person of faith. I'd love to hear about your experience. If they're currently attending a church or meeting more than 4 times a year, Christmas and Easter don't do it, all right, more than 4 times a year, what draws them and keeps them going back? So why? Why are they going? All right? Would you ever consider going again if they're not currently? And if so, what would you be looking for? Just ask questions. Learn from them. All right? And then ask them, hey, some friends and I have been talking about generational differences and church and gatherings and spiritual life and faith, and would you mind if just anonymously I shared some of the things that you've shared with me with them? Just ask for their permission, right, to share some of those things. And what you've just done is demonstrated to them a degree of vulnerability that they want to see in people. They want to know, what's behind this? Are you trying to twist my arm into coming to your meeting? Are you going to do a ninja move into a spiritual conversation? They want to know, hey, me and some friends, we've been talking. And I'd love to share some of what you've shared with me. If you don't mind, I'd love to share some of it with them, right? So to learn from them, right? And then I want you to think about those that are already present in your meeting. Those that are already present in your local meeting. And ask, how are they engaged? Not ask them. You ask this question, right? Thinking about who those people are. How are they engaged? Whether it's these 30% or 40%, right? Those that are there. How are they engaged? How could they be engaged? Do you know why they participate? Do you know why they don't participate? And would they come to the next training? And here's what I want to challenge you to do. Think about those that would and bring them with you. Bring them with you. hey, we've got a training coming up. The first part, we were actually talking about some of the differences from one generation to the next. We're really trying to learn from your generation. We want to learn about your generation. And there's this guy, and he's going to talk a little bit about ways to do that. Would you be interested in coming and being a part of that? Just invite him, right? It should be easier than inviting them to Jesus. If you're intimidated by that, I think this will be easier, right? Just an invitation, right? We'll practice some of what we've already said is difficult, right? So April 15th, I believe. April 15th, so I got the right date. I'll put it up there. And let me just say again, thank you for spending your time here today. I totally agree. This is the 20%. This is the minority that's all in. I know it. And I can tell by your excitement today, your encouragement today. And I'm very, very thankful for the time to get to spend with you. And I'm looking forward to doing it again in 4 weeks, all right? And I'll hang around for a little bit if you've got any other questions as well today. Thanks.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate everybody being here. 1 second, Scott. April 15th, please come. I need to know who is coming. We need to prepare a meal. So it'd be 10 o'clock, starting at 10, and a meal at 12, and then 1 to 3 at Cedar Square. Yes, just like on the flyer. But I need to know who's coming. So please let me know. Everybody's got my email address. Just let me know. Okay? All right. Anything else before we go? Scott, what you got, buddy?
We've got some desserts left over. If you don't take them, they're going in the trash.
If you like dessert, take it with you. If you didn't, go in the trash.
Concord, thank you for your hospitality. Thanks for being here.